On a rainy city night, a man with a limp and a clarinet hears a scream from the shadows. He has nothing to offer but music, a battered body, and a choice: step away or step in. What he does next will change a boy's life, and his own, forever. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. Rain tapped gently on the old bricks of Ashley Street. It was the kind of night when the city sighed instead of sang, and most people had already hurried home. But one man remained sitting on a folding stool near a broken lamppost, where the light flickered like it couldn't decide whether to stay or go. His name was Marlon. Marlon was in his early 50s, though life had aged him quicker. His face was dark and lined with quiet sorrow, and his left leg bent slightly inward, stiff from an old accident. A faded brace wrapped around it, hidden under a worn pair of slacks that had seen better days. Marlon didn't speak much, but his clarinet did, and tonight it spoke louder than the city ever could. The music he played drifted through the rain like smoke, soft, aching notes that curled in the cold air and made people slow down without knowing why. It wasn't a happy tune. It was full of something deeper, something that felt like remembering. Near Marlon's feet sat an open clarinet case. Inside were 3 crumpled dollar bills, a few coins, and a photo. The picture showed a younger Marlon in a classroom, surrounded by kids holding instruments. He used to teach music in a school not far from here before the accident that took his leg, his job, and most of what he called home. Still, he played. Each note came from a place too personal to name. A woman walking her dog paused and listened. A man on his phone stopped talking for a moment and just stood there, his eyes distant. A pair of teenagers crossed the street slowly, not wanting to break the spell, but not everyone appreciated it. "Hey, you there!" A voice barked from the sidewalk. Marlon looked up slowly. A city officer stood with his hands on his hips, wearing a rain-slicked jacket and a face that looked tired of people. "This ain't a music zone," the officer said. "You got a permit?" Marlon cleared his throat. "No, sir. Just playing. For a bit. Not bothering nobody." "Rules are rules," the officer said, already stepping forward. "Pack it up. You're blocking the walkway." Marlon glanced at the empty sidewalk. No one was around now. The few who had stopped to listen had already moved on. He nodded quietly, bent down, and started putting his clarinet away. As he closed the case, the photo fluttered out and landed in a puddle. Marlon picked it up gently, wiped the edges with his sleeve, and tucked it back inside. "Hurry it up," the officer said, then turned and walked off, disappearing into the mist. Marlon stood, his leg protesting with every movement. He gripped the handle of his rolling cart, tied together with bits of rope and duct tape, and began the slow limp down the alley that led to his shelter for the night, an old doorway behind a closed-down jazz bar. It wasn't much, but it kept the wind off. He didn't curse. He didn't complain. He just moved, like he always did, step by painful step. But then he heard something, a noise, faint, quick, like feet scuffling on wet pavement. Then a voice, small, sharp, scared. "Stop it, let go." Marlon froze. It was coming from the alley ahead. Another voice followed, low, mean, laughing. "Shouldn't have come this way, kid." Marlon's fingers gripped the cart tighter. His heart began to beat faster. The safe thing, the easy thing, would be to turn around. He had enough of his own problems. He didn't need to add someone else's. But he didn't turn. Instead, he let go of the cart, tucked the clarinet case under his arm, and limped forward, into the dark. As he moved, the rain grew lighter, but the air grew colder. The alley narrowed between 2 tall buildings, their windows dark. A broken light flickered above a metal door, casting long, shaky shadows. Then he saw them. 2 teenage boys, both taller than him, stood with their backs to the wall. Between them, pinned against the bricks, was a boy, maybe 12 or 13, small, pale, hair wet and messy, backpack hanging off one shoulder. One of the teens had him by the collar, the other rifled through the boy's pockets. Marlon didn't think. He just stepped forward, raised his voice, and shouted the only thing he could think of. "Hey!" The boys turned, startled. "Let him go," Marlon said, his voice rough but loud. The one holding the boy sneered. You serious, old man? Walk away. You don't want none of this. Marlon stood his ground. Neither do you. Not tonight. His leg ached, his hands shook, but he didn't move back. The younger boy's eyes locked on Marlon's. Wide, pleading, terrified. And in that moment, Marlon saw a face he recognized. Not the boy's, but the expression. It was the same one he used to see in kids who came to his classroom hungry, tired, or scared. The same look he used to see in the mirror. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He stepped forward into the light, lifted the clarinet like a club, and prepared to fight. The taller teen stepped forward first. He wore a hoodie with the sleeves, rolled up and a tattoo drawn in ink on his arm. He looked at Marlon's limp, then at the clarinet gripped in Marlon's hand like a bat. You really want to get hurt over this? He asked, his voice cold. Marlon didn't answer. He took another step forward, even though the pain shot through his leg like a nail being hammered in. He gripped the clarinet tighter and looked straight into the boy's eyes. Let him go, Marlon said again, softer this time, but firmer. The other teen, shorter and wiry, gave a dry laugh. Man, we're not even doing nothing, just having a little fun. The boy between them didn't speak. He just stared at Marlon, his chest rising fast. A fresh scrape on his cheek leaked a thin line of blood. His backpack was half open, and his hands were clenched into fists that were too small to matter. Marlon knew this wasn't going to end with talking. His leg wouldn't let him run. He couldn't throw a punch without falling over, but he also knew something else. Fear wasn't going to win tonight. Get behind me, kid, Marlon said. The boy blinked, but didn't move. Then the shorter teen lunged forward. Marlon swung the clarinet hard. It wasn't meant to hurt, just to stop him. The thick brass struck the teen's arm with a loud clang, making him stumble backward with a curse. What the? The taller one rushed next, fist raised. Marlon tried to step aside, but his bad leg buckled. The punch caught him in the shoulder, spinning him sideways into the brick wall. His clarinet dropped with a clatter. Marlon gasped as pain ran through, his back like fire. He reached for the wall to steady himself, but the next hit landed in his ribs, knocking the breath from his lungs. He slumped down, vision blurring. Then he heard it. Run! Marlon wheezed, barely able to speak. The boy didn't need to be told twice. He bolted down the alley, shoes slapping the wet pavement, his backpack flapping behind him. You little... The taller teen turned to chase him, but then something unexpected happened. The boy stopped at the end of the alley and turned back and yelled out, Help! Somebody help! He's hurt! Marlon, slumped near the dumpster, felt his fingers brushing the cold concrete. His breath was shallow and his ears rang. But that voice, the boy's voice, it cut through the haze. Footsteps echoed. The teens were running now, but not toward the boy. They were escaping. They had no interest in a crowd or flashing lights. And then there was silence. Marlon closed his eyes, but before everything went dark, he felt small hands grabbing his jacket, shaking him gently. The boy was back. His voice cracked with fear. Sir, please wake up. You saved me. Somebody help. Everything faded. The world returned slowly, like fog lifting off a river at dawn. First came the sound, a steady beep, soft and rhythmic. Not music, not rain. Something else, something cold and clean. Marlon opened his eyes. He was lying on a bed. The ceiling above him was white. Too white. Fluorescent lights buzzed quietly. A tube ran into his arm. His chest hurt. His leg was wrapped in something tight. Everything ached. He turned his head and saw a boy sitting beside him in a plastic chair, the same boy from the alley. His hoodie was too big, and he held a juice box in both hands like it was the only thing keeping him steady. His eyes were red but wide and alert. You're awake, the boy said, voice low. The nurse said you'd be okay. They said you were lucky. Marlon swallowed hard. What's your name? He asked, voice rough like sandpaper. Toby, the boy replied quickly. I'm Toby, I'm 13, my dad's on his way. Marlon nodded barely. His head felt too heavy. You saved me, Toby said. If you hadn't come, they would have... His voice broke. He looked down at his juice box. Marlon tried to smile, though it hurt. You came back, he whispered. Toby looked up again. Of course I did. I couldn't leave you there. Marlon's eyes fluttered shut, then opened slowly. Thank you. No, Toby said. Thank you. They sat in silence for a while. Marlon's mind drifted. He remembered the streetlight, flickering above him, the wet alley walls, the clarinet in his hand, the pain. And then, this boy's voice. The only one who stayed. Outside the window, the rain had stopped. The sky was gray and quiet. Toby leaned forward, his voice soft. I heard you before the alley. I was walking around. My parents were fighting. I didn't want to be at the restaurant. Then I heard your music. It made me feel, I don't know, safe, I guess. Marlon blinked at him. So I followed it, Toby continued. Sat on the curb. Listened for a while. It sounded like you were telling a story. Marlon smiled, a little more real this time. Maybe I was, he said. The door opened. A tall man in a dark suit stepped inside. His expression was serious, but his eyes softened when he saw Marlon awake. Mr. Carver, the man said. I'm Ellis Porter, Toby's father. I believe we owe you everything. Marlon looked at him. His mouth opened slightly, but he said nothing. The man stepped forward and reached out his hand, but Marlon didn't take it. Not yet. He had questions. And more music left to play. Marlon sat in the hospital bed, propped up by two thin pillows. The room smelled like antiseptic and old plastic. Monitors beeped softly beside him, blinking green and steady. Sunlight crept in through a half-open blind, warming the blanket that covered his legs. In the corner of the room, Toby sat on the same plastic chair. He hadn't left since morning. His hoodie sleeves were pulled over his hands, and his sneakers tapped nervously on the linoleum floor. You sure you're okay? Toby asked again, his voice small. Marlon nodded slightly. I've had worse. Toby gave a half smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. After a long pause, Marlon cleared his throat. You said your name was Toby. What were you doing out there? On your own? Toby looked down. My parents took me to this fancy restaurant. We were meeting someone important, I think. My dad's running for something. Maybe mayor or something like that. They were fighting. Again. Marlon waited. I told them I was going to the bathroom. Then I left. I walked until I heard your music, Toby said quietly. I followed it, sat across the street and listened. It made me feel not alone. Marlon didn't speak right away. He just looked at the boy, this small, nervous kid who had stayed beside him when others would have run. You've got a good ear, Marlon said finally. Not everyone hears what's in the music. Toby looked up. Did you used to play in a band or something? Marlon chuckled, but it ended in a cough. Used to teach music at a middle school not too far from here until the crash. After that, I didn't go back. Toby's eyes widened. You were a teacher? I was, Marlon replied softly. Until I wasn't. Before Toby could ask more, the door opened again. The man from before stepped in. Tall, dressed sharp in a charcoal, gray suit. His shoes clicked against the floor with each step. He paused when he saw Marlon awake. Marlon, right? The man asked. Marlon nodded slowly. I'm Ellis Porter, Toby's father. I wanted to come earlier, but the doctor said you needed rest. Marlon looked at the man carefully. Everything about Ellis said business. Tight jaw, clean haircut, and a voice that never wasted words. But his eyes held something else. Something tired. Thank you, Ellis said, stepping closer. You saved my son. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there. Marlon gave a small shrug. I was just in the wrong place at the right time. Still, Ellis said, you stepped in when others wouldn't. He glanced at the clarinet case leaning against the wall. That yours? He asked. It is, Marlon replied. Old, but still holds a tune. I'd like to hear it sometime, Ellis said. Marlon looked at him for a moment. I don't usually play in suits and gold rooms. Ellis nodded slowly. I figured, but what if you made an exception? Marlon raised an eyebrow. I'm hosting a private fundraiser next week, Ellis continued. Some city folks. Donors, people who've stopped listening a long time ago. Maybe someone like you can make them hear something real again. Marlon didn't answer right away. He stared out the window. He'd played in alleyways, on sidewalks, under bridges, never in rooms full of polished shoes and clinking glasses. I'd be out of place, he said quietly. Maybe, Ellis agreed. But sometimes the right voice needs to be heard in the wrong room. Marlon turned toward him again. The silence stretched. Then finally he said, I'll think about it. Ellis nodded. Fair enough. Before leaving, Ellis placed a business card on the nightstand. Call me if you decide. He turned to Toby. Come on, son, let's give Mr. Marlon some rest. Toby stood slowly, his fingers still holding the juice box. He looked at Marlon with a mixture of guilt and gratitude. I'll see you again? He asked. Marlon nodded. You better. The door closed behind them, leaving Marlon alone with the sound of machines. He looked at the clarinet case. It was scratched and dented, but it had always been there, even when nothing else had. He reached out, opened it gently, and ran his fingers over the worn keys. Later that evening, a nurse came in to check on him. She paused when she heard soft music filling the room. Marlon was sitting upright, the clarinet at his lips. The tune was low and steady, like someone humming to themselves in the dark. The nurse didn't interrupt. She just stood there for a moment, letting the sound settle into the air. That's beautiful, she whispered. Marlon didn't stop playing. He didn't even open his eyes. He just played. Because maybe, just maybe, someone was finally listening. A week later, the city air was crisp. The lights in the windows of downtown buildings reflected like stars on the wet pavement. A quiet breeze carried the sounds of laughter, clinking glasses, and music from inside a tall building with polished stone steps. Marlon stood just outside the glass doors of the Carver Hall Event Center. He wore a borrowed black jacket, one size too big, and dark pants that barely hid the brace on his leg. Beside him was his clarinet case, freshly cleaned, resting gently at his side. He took a breath and looked at his reflection in the door. His eyes looked tired but steady. For the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. Inside, the room shimmered. People in suits and gowns moved through the space like dancers, sipping drinks, chatting in low voices. At the far end stood a small stage lit by soft golden lights. It looked nothing like the street corner where Marlon usually played, but it was waiting for him just the same. Ellis Porter noticed Marlon as soon as he walked in. You made it, Ellis said, stepping forward with a firm nod. Marlon offered a quiet smile. Seems like I did. Behind Ellis stood Toby, dressed in a simple button-up shirt and holding a small notepad in his hands. When he saw Marlon, his face lit up. You nervous? Toby asked. A little, Marlon said honestly. Toby leaned closer. You got this. Then the lights dimmed, and the quiet chatter slowly faded. Ellis stepped up to a small microphone on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, before we begin tonight's program, I want to introduce someone you haven't heard yet, but someone you won't forget. He looked toward Marlon and gave a small nod. Please welcome Marlon Davis. There was polite applause, the kind given when people don't know what to expect. Marlon walked up the steps slowly, each one a small victory against the pain in his leg. The room watched him, some curious, some confused. He reached the center of the stage, opened his case, and took out the clarinet. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He closed his eyes and brought the clarinet to his lips. The first note was soft, clear, like a question floating into the room, then another, and another. The music grew like a river starting from a quiet spring. It flowed gently, wrapping around the room, reaching into corners untouched by words. It was a song about streets walked alone, about nights spent with hunger and cold. But it was also about hope, the kind that doesn't shine loud, but flickers. Gently in the dark, people stopped moving. Glasses were lowered. Someone whispered, but it faded quickly. Marlon kept playing. He swayed slightly with the rhythm, His fingers moved with grace even as his leg trembled beneath him. He played not to impress, not to prove anything, but to be heard, to be seen, to be felt. When the last note faded into silence, he lowered the clarinet and opened his eyes. For a moment, no one spoke. Then a single clap, then another. And then the room erupted in applause, not the polite kind, not the kind people give out of habit. This was loud, full, real. Marlon stood there, overwhelmed. Toby was at the edge of the crowd, clapping with both hands above his head, his eyes shining. Ellis returned to the microphone. "What you just heard," he said, "was truth, raw and unfiltered." He turned to Marlon. "And we need more of it." He looked back at the crowd. "I'm proud to announce the launch of the Marlon Davis Foundation," Ellis said. "We will provide instruments, lessons, and support to young musicians who come from hard places, just like Marlon did. Nobody should be left unheard because of where they come from or what they've been through." The applause returned, louder. Now, Marlon looked down at his clarinet, the old brass shining softly under the stage lights. After the event, people came to shake his hand. They asked about his music, his past, his story. He didn't have answers for everything, but he spoke with honesty. And people listened. Outside, Toby caught up to him before he could leave. "I signed up for lessons," Toby said, smiling. Marlon raised an eyebrow. "Clarinet?" Toby nodded. "Thought I'd give it a try." Marlon chuckled. "You're braver than most." "Maybe," Toby said. "But I had a good example." They stood together on the steps for a while, watching cars pass by under the streetlights. "Do you think they really heard me in there?" Marlon asked. Toby looked up at him. "I did." Marlon smiled, and this time it wasn't a small one. It stretched across his face like morning light breaking through clouds. He had played on corners and been ignored. He had been silenced by pain, by rules, by life. But tonight, he was heard, not just by one boy, but by a room full of people who would remember his name.